All right, guys, today we're going to be taking notes about biomolecules. All right, a biomolecule, we're going to start here with the definition of what a biomolecule is. And a biomolecule, or there are actually four major groups of molecules containing the substances necessary for performing life functions. And those four groups of molecules are known as biomolecules. So to understand some of the science of biomolecules, it's important for us to understand what different prefixes mean. So some prefixes that we're going to use a lot when we talk about biomolecules. First of all, bio. Now you have studied this before, you've heard this before, but bio means life. So like biology is the study of life. Biomolecules are the molecules necessary for life functions. Mono means one. And later when we talk about carbohydrates, you'll hear about monosaccharides. Macro means large. So if we talk about molecules that are macromolecules, that means they're larger molecules. All right, and on the flip side of that, there are some suffixes that when we hear them, we know that we're referring to a specific thing. The main one we're going to worry about in 8th grade science is the suffix of ose, or O-S-E. And ose shows us that we're talking about a sugar. Okay, so ose refers to sugars. Some examples are glucose, which is the sugar involved in cellular function in the human body, sucrose, and there's a whole list of sugars that all end in ose. All right, now we're going to start looking at the specific biomolecules. There are four, and you guys saw this last week. So we've got C, L, P, and N. So we're going to start with the C, and the C stands for carbohydrates. Excuse me. So we need to identify what a monomer is. We need to define this. And monomers, which every biomolecule has a specific set of monomers. Monomers are basically the building blocks. So they're the building blocks of biomolecules. These are the pieces that are put together to create the actual biomolecule. So let's look again at carbohydrates, and let's look at the monomer of carbohydrates. The monomer of carbohydrates are called mono. So there's that prefix that we used at the top for one. Monosaccharides. That's SACCHARIDES. I will never tell you that I'm good at spelling, so I always double check myself. Monosaccharides are often called simple sugars. So they're often called simple sugars, and carbohydrates are a good source of quick energy. This is why when runners are getting ready to run a race, they'll often have a big pasta meal right before, because pasta is full of carbohydrates. Okay, carbohydrates, as you guys learned last week, are made up, monosaccharides are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So that's CHO. We can remember carbohydrates, CHO. Now the ratio, for every 2 atoms of hydrogen, you're going to find 1 atom of carbon and 1 atom of oxygen in a monosaccharide. So that if there are 4 hydrogens, then there are 2 carbons and 2 oxygens. It's always going to occur in that ratio. And you will see that again. So just to keep our chart straight here, I'm gonna draw this little arrow that goes down so we know all of that information right there refers to carbohydrates. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the biomolecule that starts with an L, and that is the biomolecule called lipids. All right, so now we know that in order to understand more about lipids, we need to understand their monomer, or their building blocks. So the building blocks of lipids are commonly glycerol, so Glycerol, and fatty acids. And lipids are a long-term energy source. Like if you think about a camel that's got that huge fat store on its back, and we know that it can use that water and energy for a really long time, that is because that is made up of lipids. So we've got, a camel has long-term energy storage in its hump. So what about the elements that are in lipids? So they have the same 3 elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, as carbohydrates, but the ratio is different. In this case, for every 8 hydrogens, there are 3 oxygens and 3 carbons. So we're gonna identify that ratio as 3 to 8 to 3. And last but not least, let's draw our arrow down here. Sorry about that, guys. Jax the dog was trying to make his debut into science class. So now we're gonna look at proteins. All right, so proteins, we've almost all heard of them before. We know some of the functions that proteins have in the human body. But first, let's look at their monomers. Let's look at what their basic building blocks are. And proteins are made up of amino acids. So when your workout drink says it's got amino acids in it, that sounds real fancy, but that just means it has protein in it. Proteins and amino acids help with muscle development. They also are important to the immune system. And and in the creation of enzymes that assist the body in breaking down foods and making sugar usable into the cells. All right, so the elements that are present in amino acids and therefore proteins are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now, there are a lot of different types of amino acids, so these aren't always going to be in a consistent ratio like we see for carbs and for lipids, but we will always have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in proteins. So I'm going to add our arrow in there. Those are all the things we're going to talk about with proteins. So now, last but not least, definitely not least, we're going to talk about nucleic acid. So nucleic acid. Now, nucleic acid, it's easy to remember what the building blocks of nucleic acids are because they start out as almost the same word. So nucleotides are the building blocks of nucleic acids, and nucleic acids form DNA and RNA. And like we've heard before, DNA and RNA carry all genetic information and trait coding. So I have red hair, that is determined by my DNA and RNA. If you have brown hair, that's determined by your DNA and RNA. Every physical trait of a person is determined by DNA and RNA, therefore by your nucleic acid. So nucleic acid contains the same elements as proteins. So that is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And again, those are sometimes in different ratios. So we're not going to identify just one ratio with nucleic acids, but we are going to finish that off with our arrow straight down. All right, and last but not least, we've got some important information that you need to go forward knowing about types of compounds. We've got two basic categories of compounds that we're going to talk about today, and those are organic. Now, I'm not talking about like organically grown things, and you'll understand that here in a minute, and inorganic compounds. Now, organic compounds, we've all heard the word organic before, but we've probably never heard it in the understanding of compounds. But organic compounds all contain carbon. All right, and anything that contains any organic compound is related to things that are living. So living things and life are related to, organic compounds are related to living things or life. So all the compounds that create us are organic compounds. All the compounds that create Jax the dog, who's laying right beside of me, those are all organic compounds. Now, on the opposite of organic is inorganic. So in being not. So inorganic compounds contain no carbon, and these compounds are non-living. So these compounds are non-living. All right, that's what we're gonna go over for today. Make sure that when you are finished with these notes that you upload a copy to your Canvas page and hang on to these notes because they will help you out later in the week. All right, thank you guys and have a wonderful time.